I was in the art department for a year, thereabouts. Towards the end of the series, we had to form a scratch special effects unit. This was because the special effects were a little bit behind schedule. Subsequently, whereas I'd been offered the position of running the art department, Derek Meddins was happy enough with my work that he offered me a job to work in special effects and perhaps work up to be a director. But David Lane, who had got the job of directing Thunderbirds ago, the feature,
Thunderbirds are go!
He approached me to be his assistant. He said, look, come with me and there's every chance that you might be directing come the end of the feature. So I then had to apologise to Derek for not taking his job, as I'd already previously apologised to Keith Wilson for not taking his job. Sure enough, after we finished the feature, Harry the cleaner approached me in the corridor, said, congratulations, Ken. And I said, well, what? Congratulations for what? And he said, you're directing on the next series.
Atlanta, is he?
Yes, Bones. He gave his life for the World Aquanaut Security Patrol.
When I first learned from Harry the cleaner that I was going to direct on the next series, I then had to sit down and think very, very seriously about the fact of whether I could direct, because I'd never directed anything.
I think walking on the stage for the first time with total fear. You know, I could almost have frozen, but you can't show that, obviously. You have to walk on with confidence, particularly when you get a telegram first morning from Sylvia saying, good luck, Dave.
I got hold of an old script and had a word with Alan Patillo, who was the script editor.
Alan Patillo was considered to be the classiest director, and he was the best storyteller.
When you got your script, you sat down and read it thoroughly, got the hang of the story, get the point of the story, where the climaxes were.
I broke the script down as I would shoot it, with sketches, camera angles, etc., etc. And he looked at a couple of pages. I'd perhaps done dozens and dozens of breakdowns, looked at a couple of pages, and he said, you'll be fine. Don't worry about a thing, you're fine.
The first time out, what you need is a good crew. The crew knew you were new to it. The crew knew that you were nervous, but they were there with you all the way, whatever you wanted. The minute you walked on that stage, you were the director, and they treated you like the director, even though you were the editor yesterday.
When I first went to AP Films, I was really surprised that the building I was presented with was a film studio, because it looked more like a factory where they make aluminium pipes or something. Really.
One of the hysterical things was if you had a storm, it was just galvanized iron sheeting, and it was just, literally, it was a warehouse. When it rained, it sounded like thunder on that roof. And there were times, literally, when you couldn't hear what the puppeteers were saying, and you couldn't hear the dialogue, and speak up, because we just shoot through that, because it wasn't audio.
The entire series was filmed, of course, in the Slough trading stage, not in Shepperton or Pinewood or Ealing, or where real films were being made. And we came and went every day in our motor cars, and we lived like a religious community living together, unscathed by the outside world. This gave this impression that we were working on some big secret project, you know.
The sets were all built on stages which were about, I guess, 18 inches off the ground. Everything was third scale, so some of the sets were very big indeed.
Here I was faced with making puppet films, which was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. So I came up with the idea of putting the puppeteers overhead. So we built a Dexian bridge, and the puppeteers stood on the Dexian bridge, and the puppet was down below, which meant there was nothing behind the puppet. And so we could use cutouts of hills and that sort of thing. And that was the first step towards making, in my opinion, the puppet film respectable.
He was a visionary, no question about it. And he had that drive to push it through. And also he was a perfectionist. Everything had to be right. Nothing went out of the house without him looking at it. If it had to be reshot, it had to be reshot. If it didn't work, then he'd make sure it did work by the time it left.
I was thinking all the time, if I make really good puppet films, the broadcasters or the financiers are going to say, listen, this guy's wasting his time. Let's give him a live action show. So guess what happened? They said, hey, this guy makes great puppet films, let's give him some more.
Sylvia Anderson did most of the handing out of scripts. How she chose them for the directors, I've no idea.
Choosing of the director for an episode was always very difficult because it depended which sets were ready, which revamped puppets were ready to be used, and whether the script was ready had been recorded. Because there were so many other processes that had to be gone through that you just had to accept the fact that you were next in line to direct an episode, and you just were presented with a script.
I don't think anybody was ever sort of miffed at what they got, you know. It's just, right, that's my script, and you were enthusiastic and got on with it.
You then had meetings with the art department if you wanted anything special built, anything by way of designs, any special aspects of the design that you'd want.
Have a word with the puppeteers, wardrobe.
Special effects department.
In the script you'd think, oh well, that's a special effects shot, and so you would mark up all the special effects shots and which way the puppet should be facing and which way the model should be facing, all of that sort of thing. You would grab an hour or so with Derek Meddings or Brian Johncock to discuss it. He was very cooperative, Derek, and would often do a little drawing of what you wanted.
Mike Trim would literally draw, storyboard all of the shots that you were wanting. Then they went away and shot their stuff on the special effects side according to the drawing, so you knew exactly what you were going to get. We'd get on and shoot the puppet stuff as best we could, keeping to the schedules.
Everybody was involved with another episode outside of the one they were shooting. They were always lunchtime meetings. You know, you had to be ready for that. You'd say, right, ready to go. Oh, where's Christine? Oh, she's in a meeting for 5 minutes. You know, where's so-and-so? Oh, they've just gone over to see Derek about something. It was a tension, but it was a tension all over the place.
No, Professor McLean, you really expect me to...
Dad, you've got to let me do it!
Keep out of this, Joe. Go outside. Now, Max, now look, Mr. Weston. Although Joe is not my real son...
Professor, we know all
since Mary died, that boy has meant more to me than...
we know all that. No boy ever had a better father.
And you expect me to risk his life?
Just try to see our side.
It's out of the question.
Professor McLean, the opportunity's here to prevent war.
Well, find someone else.
To save human life.
Joe's life comes
Make
first
new
to me.
discoveries. Just hold it, will you? Think of the potential, Mac.
But Joe is so young.
You won't regret it, Mac.
The director used to function originally from a little booth at the one end of the studio, up a few steps and into a dark little room where he would sit at a desk watching what the camera was filming on a monitor. But by his side would be the lip sync operator who would be controlling the mouth movements of the puppets performing on the stage outside.
You were a bit isolated from the crew. It was elevated so you could see over the stage and see what was going on, as well as seeing a monitor.
Dave Elliott said, oh, you'll enjoy directing. You go up in the booth there and you just speak into the microphone and they obey, you know. It's like some sort of prison camp commander, you know, issuing orders, you know.
And it was a little bit like an ivory tower. I didn't like it very much, but that's the way it was.
The only way of communicating with the camera crew or the puppeteers or the art department was by a loudspeaker where you'd press a button and speak into a microphone, which I thought was very impersonal and not very communicative.
As the director, you'd be popping up and down constantly, but you'd basically be directing from the floor. And then you would sometimes go up to the booth just to see what the actual shot looked like, because there was video assist on the cameras, so you could actually see what the camera was seeing.
You spent most of your time on the floor, to be quite frank, because you were placing puppets and working things out and talking to the puppeteers and so on.
Directing puppets obviously is much different than directing humans, because puppets can't do what humans can.
I would have in my own mind how I wanted to shoot the shot and then discuss it with the cameraman and the puppeteers and say, look, can we do this? Can we get Mike Mercury to walk over here? Can he go over there, pick this up, put that down? And John would say, oh, I don't know if we can do that because there's certain restrictions here. Mary would say, hang on a minute, I've just broken the string, so we'll have to restring the puppet.
I once said the biggest problem with puppets is frustration.
Very, very difficult.
Very frustrating.
Very frustrating.
They break down every 5 minutes. Every 5-10 minutes, something goes wrong.
It wasn't like actors being ready and then you shoot a scene. You then had to lose the wires against the background, which was frustrating.
You never seem to get a run at getting a sequence.
10, 15 minutes of preparation and tension and rehearsing, getting it right. You know, you'd be ready, you'd be shooting now, and all of a sudden, you know, and the head would go and, you know,
the wire
would
break.
Come out, and this would go and that would go.
There was always a problem with every single shot. Even if you went in for a close-up, suddenly the wires were showing too much. Suddenly we could see the hairline join on his head.
The girls got so tired leaning out, you know, with the puppet, and oh, my arms are tired, and they relax. And the two wires that went down to work the solenoid would touch the metal part of the bridge, and bang, the bloody wires would fuse out. You always knew when there was trouble because the puppet would go boom.
Suddenly the solenoid operator couldn't get the dialogue right. It was opening his mouth on the wrong lines.
And gradually we would hopefully get about 3 minutes in a day's work.
You had to compensate all the time for the problems. You had to get around them. You think, well, I can cut away from that, I can use this, I can use that bit from there.
And we could get the puppets to do most things that we wanted, but the thing we couldn't get them to do was to walk.
It was very, very difficult to make puppets look real and human and could do anything. I mean, like they couldn't really run.
Or walking even.
Or walking.
If the walk didn't look good, even as a head and shoulders shot, the walk out didn't look good, you just had to go again. You had to reshoot it because it wasn't in the character of what Gerry was trying to get from the series.
You could give the impression where you would have somebody cross an alleyway, but you'd put something in between them and their lower half. You'd shoot the shot and they'd run across and back. And it looked as if they'd actually run somewhere. Of course, they hadn't run anywhere. They'd just been dragged across.
There were many puppets, if their mood should change, you had to cut away to another character and cut back, by which time you'd change the head to a smiler or a frowner or whatever. So you never actually saw any changes of mood on any character without a cut in between of something else going on or whoever they were talking to.
Captain Scarlet, I sentence you to death.
I understand, sir.
However, as you are indestructible, there'd be little point in standing you up before a firing squad. Dismiss. And you can wipe that grin off your face, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir, Colonel, sir.
You had to cut, take the head off, change the head. So everything took 10 times longer than it would to shoot a normal live action.
The puppet I most enjoyed using in all the Gerry Anderson series was Virgil in Thunderbirds. He was designed and created by John Brown, the puppeteer, but he seemed to have a sort of face that suited any mood, any emotion, whatever was going on, his face was appropriate. It was a lovely, very good face. It took the cameras beautifully, as indeed all of them did, but his especially was dramatically useful.
Flash from Thunderbird 2. Cut engines. Fire flash, lift port wing. Lift port wing. Cut power. Okay, fire flash, reverse thrust.
And then there were things like little tricks that one used, like you could give the impression of them having put some glasses on. You'd shoot the puppet with a shot with the glasses going up to there, which would take hours to sort of wire it all up and get it ready. Then you'd do another shot where the glasses are on and the hands have been released and the hands are lowered down. So with the little cutaway in between, it gives the impression that they've put the glasses on. I got that idea from when David talked about doing with cigarettes. Oh no, you were very keen at sort of putting fags into their mouth. I wasn't very keen on that.
Well, I mean, I was always being told, look, smoking's becoming a non-thing, blow it, I'll make them smoke now.
Oh, dear, 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 what have I done? This lady's so stupid she can't even see that the table's been fixed.
We would start with the permanent sets, which were quite big sets, and gradually move on to the smaller sets.
Now, budgets were very tight in those days, and the size of the sets were very restricted, But one day I thought it went too far. I arrived in the morning to speak to Reg Hill, the art director of the series. I said to him, "Good morning, Reg, where is my set for the interior of the helicopter?" He said, "Well, you're using the back projection." I said, "Yes, I know we're using the back projection, but where is the set for the foreground?" And he said, "The set for the foreground," he said, "there's it." And he held up a bit of stick in my face, saying, "That's your set." It was just a bit of strut that we had to feed into the shot to make it look as if the character, some helicopter pilot, was sitting beside.
You would talk to the cameraman and discuss what sort of shot you would like to do. He'd say, "No, I can't do that," because you had to be very careful. Sometimes the sets were quite small, and if you weren't careful, you'd be panning off the set onto the studio floor.
Julian Lugrin started off as a camera operator and then became a lighting man. In actual fact, Julian taught me a lot, especially about lenses. I would say to Julian, "Oh, something's not right there," and he said, "Well, look, if you move over a little to the left, you'll find it's much better." And sure enough, it would be. With somebody like Julian, you would eventually say, "I'd like a medium shot on Venus at the controls," and you would leave him to do the setup, knowing damn well that it would be what you wanted or what was needed.
Gerry Hansen set the style, but we were not obliged to copy him, so we could elaborate on it or simplify it or make it a bit more difficult by having unusual setups and just do different things that caught one's fancy.
We're nearly there.
If I looked at any of the films and there were no credits, I couldn't tell you who directed what. Because I've looked at old films of mine and thought, "Oh, that's good, I wonder who directed that." And then suddenly, wham, oh, it was one of mine.
With Fireball XO5, I tried a different visual approach than I had done with Supercar. I tried to imagine the resemblance to those space comics that were very popular at the time, where the sets where the characters moved around and were extravagantly large and extended away into infinity. So we tried to do three-dimensional shots with the, say, big head in the foreground and Dr. Venus away in the background. But that was because it was a lengthy procedure, because we had to get wide-angle lenses and pump lots of light onto the set, and it could be very wasteful of time, so we had to forego those times.
On the black and white puppet films, the sets were coloured, but you always looked at everything through a pan glass, because if you had an outrageous colour, then it probably wouldn't photograph very well.
I was quite happy working black and white, because black and white camera work, photography, focuses the mind much more, focuses you on the story more, whereas in colour, which we had with Stingray and, of course, Thunderbirds later, still, the spectacle of colour distracted you from the main action.
I mean, I think many feature films would be much better in black and white. You can get a better mood with black and white somehow.
And colour has its uses too, but they're very different.
depends upon the story, obviously.
The episode called Calling Charlie Queen. I enjoyed the combination of the two different disciplines of live action and puppet action.
Please help me. Please answer me. Oh!
You've been a naughty boy again, haven't you, Hopkins?
And in fact, it was a thing that the company didn't pursue at that time, though they went back to it some years later and made a much bigger show of it in a later series called The Secret Service.
Partlow, I'll explain to you. Now, Matthew, my gardener, is deep joy with green fingers in the garbage, you understand?
I see.
We never met the voice artists at all. That was all handled by Sylvia and Gerry. So when we actually started shooting the episode, that had been completely edited and was ready to go. On a Monday morning, one would be presented with a 1/4-inch tape. We'd had a whole of the episode recorded onto it.
You could change things slightly by the action, but you couldn't change dialogue. So, you just had to go along with these things.
What's going on? Those lights.
It's always happening.
Must fix them sometime.
Of course, you didn't really direct the puppets. You were directing the puppeteers and asking them to do what you wanted the puppets to do.
Let's face it, as a director, if you pardon the pun, you were in their hands.
Whenever possible, I tried to use the same puppeteer for the same character within an episode, because the puppeteers, not only Mary Turner and Christine Glanville, had different methods, but all puppeteers are people, so they have different ways of interpreting a part.
And there was a sense of sort of constant activity and puppeteers coming down and puffing the strings, because we used to have to puff the strings with those powdered pigments to kind of make them blend away into the background.
And again, that slowed you down. It wasn't like muffing the mule, where it was legs and arms up in the air. If it went a little bit strange, you had to reshoot it, and that of course took time.
You had to get through it because the next show was coming on. It was all geared up.
We had a schedule to keep.
Aha.
That was the worst thing, you know.
Was.
Oh my God, look at the time,
You spent half the time trying to lose wires instead of getting on with the next scene or shooting the scene you were on. So you were fighting schedules all the time.
Because we were always limited by time. Time was the element. We couldn't really waste time. We had to get on with it.
I remember getting really cross with one of the art directors, and I really tore him off a strip, and Keith looked at me, put his arm on his waist and went, "Oh, you tatty old slag." And I mean, that was it. I just dissolved into laughter.
Was it really as camp as that?
Oh, my, well,
I mean,
could be, yes.
You could be camp when you like.
Yeah, I mean,
Once you'd shot the complete episode, we would then hand it over to the editor, and you would work closely with the editor and make sure that he would cut it how you hoped it would all go together.
I was always happy to let somebody else do the editing and then look, because editors, have a lot to offer.
They would bring the whole thing to life with the effects and the music.
And usually editors make quite good directors.
I was editing on Stingray, and then I was down to edit the first episode of Thunderbirds. And then Gerry said, "We need another director, and would you like to direct?" It was as simple as that, really.
They've seen the mistakes that other directors made, so they know how to get out of trouble.
Gerry was a terrific editor, and he had tremendous patience. When we had a film that didn't work, he would pull it to bits and try this here, try that there. And whilst you were mechanically doing it for him, you were also learning.
But I much preferred editing to directing, didn't you? The thing about directing is, and the same with the camera crew, sound crew, you've got to be right the first day. With editing, you can edit all day long.
Oh, yeah.
It can be a bloody mess. So you can look at it at the end of the day and say, "Oh, well, I'll fix that tomorrow morning."
Very
As a
true,
director,
David.
you cannot do this.
There was a team spirit about this group of people that had grown up with this whole thing. I remember us trying quite a few times to bring in production managers who had done feature films and cameramen who'd done feature films and bigger television shows and live action. but somehow they never really worked.
I remember the whole thing of we're moving, onward and upward. I think one of the reasons the old-timers may have been a little more sort of down on what happened later is Gerry really was trying to professionalize the operation. It's why he brought me in. It's why he brought Frank Hollins in. It's why he brought a lot of people in who'd come from the, quote, real television industry. And I was used to a normal television set in normal, shooting, and that meant everybody had to be quiet, and, the first AD ran the floor, and you basically said, quiet everybody, and you moved everybody around. And I remember one time coming on the floor quite early on and sort of saying, right, quiet, please. And one of the lip sync operators saying, why? It's all, there's no audio here. It's all pre-recorded. It all comes down these wires. It had been much more family making it. By the time I joined, it was an industry, but it was fun.
That's what made it so thrilling for all the young people that came from, not from within the industry, but from outside the industry, got their breaks there.
A great opportunity. Gerry was very kind in giving a lot of people their first starts, and i.e. directing and cutting.
So much so that I managed to get a few friends in that were equally in mundane jobs, and it subsequently opened their lives out as well. So we've all done pretty well out of it as a little growing up team.
And we were all young. I mean, I was, 22 at that time, directing my first show, having this wonderful thing. Everybody knew, you said you were working with Gerry Anderson on Century 21, and everybody went, cool, wow, that's amazing.
One's proud to be associated with anything that's a success. But I must say, I'm constantly amazed at the persistence of the success of these films, that they appeal to a generation of viewers over and over and over again.
To me, looking back, it was just this wonderful playhouse in a fairly dull, dour set of industrial buildings on a Slough trading estate.
Where people say, I can remember what I was doing when Kennedy was assassinated. Well, I can remember the day of the Cuban crisis, when the world held its breath and thought there was going to be a nuclear war. I was shooting an episode of Fireball XL5, and I thought to myself, my God, how would Steve Zodiac handle this situation? And I look back with nostalgia and think, yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Gee, that was a great scene. Wasn't that a great scene, Mr. Goggleheimer?
Yeah, that was truly a magnificent scene.
Hey, turn over.